I'd like to welcome you all to the Black Heritage Society. My name is Sunny Stokes. I'm the Managing Director. I'd also like to introduce our chair, Will Bundy, who's present tonight.
Welcome, welcome.
We'd like to welcome you to our Living History lecture series. And tonight we have a very special one on the Afro Latin experience. And our presenter tonight is Elvys Ruiz. And with that, I'm going to let you get started. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. So before I begin my talk, I want to thank all of you for your presence tonight. And I'm also very indebted and honored to be here. Also, my deepest appreciation to Jordan Fowler and Teresa Guzman Stokes, as well as JR for suggesting me to be a speaker tonight. I also want to recognize the presence of two persons that are my beloved mentors, which are Olga Noguera and Fran de Petrillo. Please give them a round of applause. These are my mentors. Yeah. Also, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Professor Jose Aleman, please. And also Senator-elect Ana Quesada, please. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. This is very important because, we are here to celebrate the 40th anniversary of this prestigious organization, so it's good to be here bringing a different flavor to the series of thought that they have organized in this celebration. So before we go deep into the subject matter, I would like to start by sharing with you what was my experience as a young man in dealing with the issues of racial identity in the Dominican Republic. This is the country where I was born and raised, and also how the information that was inculcated in me and other youth about blacks formed the basis for the predisposition that many Dominicans have against those of dark skin complexion, which I resisted to assimilate and put into practice in the form of racism. At an early age, I was taught many things about Haitians, but nothing good. I learned about their persistent interest to unify the entire island and keep us under their yoke. I heard about galipotes, tuntunes, and voodoo. I heard about the contagious diseases they spread, that they were uneducated, immoral, and unscrupulous people. These and many others generalized information, which are unfounded, were easily assimilated by us because they were highly amplified in the community through popular legends. And these myths and unproven fabrications serve as a foundation for the construction of the black imaginary in the Dominicans' collective memory. Among the many horror stories that we were told constantly, was that during the time that our nation was occupied by the Haitian army, their soldiers used to throw Dominican children up and catch them with the tips of their bayonets, which was not true, was another fabrication. So that was the modus operandi, the distortion of historical events by the Dominican intellectual elite to instill a sentiment of abhorrence against Haitian people. Furthermore, these grotesque images of children being killed in such a barbaric way was illustrated in many of the history books that we read in elementary and middle schools, which was detrimental to many young students who were not yet able to formulate an opinion of their own race, about their own race, and now with the toxic information they learn, will have reasons to see blacks different and treat them with disdain. In the Dominican Republic, the education system, as ideological apparatus of the state, has denied our people the right to know the contributions of blacks to our history. Many of the textbooks used in the schools are illustrated with images of people of European ancestry. To say also that in some of the history books that we learn, they had deleted between 200 and 300 years of what was, the slavery time. So they have deleted so people don't get to learn about that period in history. So the governmental authorities and white nationalists want to whiten the Dominican society because they are afraid Haitians will take control of the nation. The presence of Haitian immigrants in the country has a name: Pacific invasion. So by having Dominicans to exalt their Spanish heritage, deny their blackness, and despise Haitians, the country will be safe. My intention for the analysis today of today's topic is to provide you with a panorama of the historical reasons why this negrophobic sentiment exists in many countries of Latin America. I will analyze this in the context of race relation to demystify socially constructed categories that have given rise to a mistaken identity of many Latinos, who, for reasons that will be explained later, do not see a benefit in reclaiming their African ancestry or even their indigenous lineage, and prefer to identify more with the Hispanic values. If you look at the Hispanic television, you look at Univision, you Telemundo, then you tell me who are the faces that you see in those programs. And when you see a black face, a black person, then the question is, what role do they play in those programs? So in the case of Dominicans, when it comes to define ourselves racially, we claim to be mestizos, a mix of whites, Indians, and blacks, or a hybrid. However, none of these categories explain who we really are. And this racial ambiguity becomes an obstacle for the understanding of our true ethnic roots. The Dominican nation of 10 million people is considered the only country in the world with a mulatto majority, and yet most Dominicans do not accept ourselves as such. Blacks and mulattoes comprise over 85% of the total population. The mulattoes represent about 70%, blacks 15%, whites 13%, and 2% represent the mixture of ethnic groups like the Chinese, the Jews, among others. So the identity of the Dominican people is essentially mulatto, although this truth has been undermined due to the fallacy inculcated among us from yesteryear by the white nationalist groups that has ruled the homeland since the formation of the Republic. And also I have to say that we use in Dominican Republic and many countries the term mulatto most apply to the female women. So we use more mulata than mulatto. And because also mulata is being seen as a sexual symbol. So while we assert this, we also recognize that the Dominican nation is multi-ethnic as well, due to the arrival in the country in the last century of immigrant groups from different parts of the Caribbean and Europe, which undoubtedly have left their mark on the cultural and linguistic diversity of the nation that we are today. Nevertheless, the Dominican identity is essentially the product of blacks and whites, which have been in the country from the 14th to the 19th century. Therefore, in our physiognomy, we have a bicultural and bi-blood syncretism. The extinct Dominican Haitian activist Sonia Pierre, in her paper entitled Nationalist Phobias and the Dominican Haitians, in regard to the Dominican racial composition, she stated the following: any observer without a deep analysis will conclude that the Dominican Republic is a country marked by ethnic, cultural, and racial diversity that are obvious. But the social classes that have held power since the birth of our country to this day have used all possible means to ward off the Dominican Republic from the African elements as part of the racial composition of the Dominican people. And this is true. They have ridiculed the Dominican people by portraying them as what they are not. When we observe the phenotypic characteristics of the vast majority of Dominicans, we can easily tell that they do not look European or have the aboriginal features that we can find in many people from Australia and from South and Central America, where mestizaje or mixture between whites and native indigenous occur. So we have to remember that in what was called Hispaniola later, the island was Quisqueya or Haiti. Before the conquerors came, the estimate of indigenous people was between 250,000 to 300,000. And this population was decimated in the first 50 years of the colonial presence. So that is why we are the product of the slaves, blacks, and the Europeans who were present in the country. So as it was expressed by prestigious scholar Silvio Torres Ayán, in the Dominican Republic, the official narrative of the nation has resisted the idea that people can hold racially or culturally distinct subgroups. Such narrative, at its worst, has adopted a Eurocentric vision of national identity that looks at Spain, the ancestral roots of the population, excluding all non-European heritage. And at its best, this narrative has subscribed to the ideology of miscegenation, from which the numerous ethno-racial components of the country have emerged easily into a Hispanizing melting pot, producing a sort of transnational and Europeanized mestizo as the basis for the national identity. In many countries of Latin America, the fears towards black was instilled in many children during their childhood. It was common to hear parents tell their children that if they misbehaved, the cuco was going to come and take them away. The first association of the mysterious and surreal cuco was with a black, undefined being. The images that we have of the demon are of a black creature. Therefore, in our unconscious, we associate black with evil, witchcraft, and voodoo. Rituals and religious practice that society has branded as satanic. So these absurd ideas have contributed to the contempt many of our people have towards blacks. I don't know if you remember the Haitian earthquake. You remember the earthquake? All of the images that you saw on TV about the earthquake? Well, you saw also a lot of people saying that the reason for the earthquake, it was due to the practice of voodoo in Haiti. So many people attribute that catastrophe to the fact that these people practice their own religion, which is voodoo is a religion. You know, as candomblé, as spiritism, as Santeria in Cuba is just a religion. Okay, but see how, because of the fact that they practice this religion, which has is rooted in African tradition, now that is the blame for the natural catastrophe. So the anthropologist Martha Ellen Davis points out that the prejudice and paranoia of Dominican dictator Rafael Leonidas Trujillo was manifested through the legislation of the time directed against the manifestation or alleged infiltration of Haiti. There were sanctions, for example, against the voodoo expressions. In the Dominican Penal Code, the law established the penalty of 2 months to 1 year of imprisonment for persons convicted of participating in voodoo ceremonies in private or public places. Now, let's talk a little bit about the concept of whitening the race, which is going to be the second part of this talk. So, in this part, we'll analyze the impact that the notion of whitening the race had among those who were blacks in Latin America and the Caribbean. Let's look at 2 tragic events that occurred in Brazil and the Dominican Republic, respectively, which are very similar, even though they are 40 years apart. And I think this is important in order to understand why some people wanted to identify more with their Hispanic ancestry and had their African heritage. As you know, and I just mentioned the dictator Rafael Leonidas Trujillo, this dictator ruled the country for 31 years, from the 1930 to 1961, where he was killed. And we have to remember that the reason why Trujillo ruled the country was because of the help of the United States, who invaded the nation in 1916. They invaded the nation and stayed in Dominican Republic for 6 years, until the 24. But also during that period of time, in 1915, United States invaded Haiti, and it stayed there longer for probably about 17 years, and was also responsible for many of the dictatorships that ruled Latin America during that period of time, because it was kind of the strategy the United States used to combat, the spread of the communism. So, okay, so you know that in 1937, probably you have heard of the massacre that happened in the Dominican Republic. So Rafael Leonidas Trujillo orchestrated a plan called Dominicanización de la Frontera, of Dominicanization of the border, whose purpose was to whiten the race. Under this ghastly plan, between 5,000 and 20,000 Haitians living in the northern area of the Dominican border with Haiti were killed. The irony was that days after this massacre, the government opened the doors for Jewish people to come to the Dominican Republic and provide them with good lands and economic resources to work in the farm in substitution of Haitians. Trujillo's obsession with whitening the Dominican race began with himself. Distraught because he was not accepted in the white elite private class, because he himself, Trujillo, was a Haitian descent and had a very dark complexion, Trujillo wanted to look lighter and began using pancake makeup. There was a journalist named Bernard Dieterich who covered Trujillo's latest year, and he recorded the dictator chasing photographers away when his makeup started to streak in the heat. So now, as we analyze what happened with Trujillo and the killing of, in the 1937 of this, between 5 to 20,000 Haitians, now let's look at what happened in Brazil. And we're talking about 40 years apart, both events. So in Brazil, the policy of whitening actually became official doctrine before the end of slavery. Employers and government officials sponsored the immigration of European labor. Government paid for the importations of millions of Europeans. Planters in Sao Paulo founded the Society for the Promotion of Immigrants from Europe. They paid their passage and provided them with plantation work. In 1897, the Minister of Finance, Rui Barbosa, issued an order to destroy all historical documents and files that related to the slave trade and slavery. The massacre of 1897 of the rural religious settlement of Canudos in the northeast Badlands was abetted by the institutionalization of white supremacist attitude among the Brazilian elite. The military slaughtered as many as 35,000 who were classified as mixed race. As you can see now in the analogy, the similarity of the two events. So, almost finished, because I want to have a good conversation so that we can participate, ask questions, and we'll provide our inputs into this conversation. So when we look at negrophobia here in the United States, in comparison with the rest of Latin America and the Caribbean, there are vast differences. We have to understand that this country only received a small portion of enslaved Africans, approximately 4.6 out of the 10 million that were brought to the Americans. The experience in dealing with racism in Latin American countries is harsher than the United States. So I would like to hear also from Kisto, who is an expert in this topic, to hear what he has to say about this too. So the civil rights movement has become one of the greatest things that happened to this country, which is a unique phenomenon because many other Spanish-speaking nations are not able to guarantee the constitutional rights that will protect their citizens from discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. In countries where civil rights does not exist, people are at the mercy of being treated inferior. I'm going to give you a few examples of why many people of color in our countries are excluded from the opportunities for social advancement. When a person sends a resume for a job opening, a picture is required to be attached to the resume. If a woman is black, has an afro or curly hair, we know that the chances of that person to be considered for a job interview, despite of having excellent qualifications, are slim, right? And this is what happens when a woman does not have good hair. And this is true. In July of 2014, the Junta Central Electoral, or the Central Electoral Board, in charge of issuing identifications in the Dominican Republic, denied a cedula, which is an identification card, to a journalist of name Gracie de la Cruz. When she went to get a new ID because her hair was not straightened, they denied, they don't allow her to get the ID. So she responded to this, saying that 80% of the Dominican women have curly hair. She said that it was irrational that they asked us to use a blower to straighten our hairs in order to obtain such a document. She continues saying, this is one of the most mixed afro-descendant countries, and this type of negative manifestations against Dominican women because of a racial condition or ethnicity, it is just a humiliation. I'm going to give you an example of another incident of discrimination the same year and month, and it was the case of Nikki Gonzalez Mendez, an Afro-Dominican woman who obtained a degree in political science and wanted to pursue a postgraduate study in Spain. She denounced that the Minister of Superior Education, Ligia Amada Melo, denied her a scholarship for the postgraduate study because she has an afro hair and was antiquated. In response to the hair texture in many Afro-Latinas, one of our local writer and poet, Susie Santana, in her book entitled Pelo Bueno, she raises concern about the discrimination and hostile racial attitudes towards women of African descent in our countries. And she has been a strong voice for the voiceless on this matter. In many countries of Latin America, blacks are more likely to be poorer, less educated, have shorter lives, and have higher infant mortality rates than whites, according to a report from the United Nations Economic Commission. Unemployment opportunities are limited, and as a result, people perform informal or domestic jobs. In Brazil, for example, nearly 70% of the population live in extreme poverty, according to a 2008 and the congressional report. In Latin America, the plight of people of African descent is overlooked, although they account for between 20 and 30% of the population. For this reason, the United Nations proclaimed the International Decade for People of African Descent in the period 2015 to 2024, which has been received with great enthusiasm. This initiative came as a result of the fourth International Forum of African Descendant Social Movements and Social Change in Latin America and the Caribbean, and this event took place in Caracas in June 2011. Also, there was the formation of the Regional Network of People of African Descent in Latin America and the Caribbean. The forum as well highlighted the importance to recognize the contribution made by people of African descent to the construction of the continent. We know that people often say that they want to identify themselves as they want it, but what we know is that usually they stay away from their blackness. It seems to me that the damage of classifying African people as blacks and lesser is almost irreversible. Today we have a global epidemic which is more prevalent in African countries. Its name, skin bleaching. In the Caribbean, we have countries like Jamaica. This is a great epidemic. In Nigeria, Nigeria leads the list of countries where women are using skin whitening products. Although people use these products for different reasons and to treat the skin disorders, the vast majority use them because they think darker tone is unattractive. It is the desire of many of these women to go the standards of beauty that the media portrays. Let's talk about now the implications, to identify ourselves as blacks has for many of us. So for many Dominicans who denounce that racism is real in the Dominican Republic, such as Professor Jose Alemán and many others, or raises our voices against the injustice against people of Haiti and against people and against Dominicans of darker skin complexions who have been discriminated or mistreated, there is a repercussion. We are labeled as anti-Dominican, pro-Haitian, unpatriotic, etc., etc., etc. Dominicans in the homeland and the diaspora are divided on the issues of racial discrimination, immigration, and the treatment of Haitians who live in the country. There is this double standard of Dominicans who want better treatment for nationals living in Puerto Rico or United States who are undocumented. But when asked if the same treatment can be provided to undocumented Haitians in the homeland, the response usually is the same. No, we are a poor country. You cannot compare United States with us. In closing, I personally think that the reason Latinos want to mask our African heritage is for motives that has to do more with opportunities for social, economic, and political advancement. There is no way that we can break this umbilical cord that ties us with the original motherland. 5 centuries of African presence in the American is manifested in everything we do and are. From music, food, arts and craft, custom, clothing, literature, religious cults, dances, legends, carnivals, festivities, etc. The African presence is in the voodoo of Haiti, in the Santeria of Cuba, in the Spiritism in Puerto Rico, in the Rastafarian movement in Jamaica, in Candomblé in Brazil, in the Congos of Milla in Dominican Republic, in Shango in Trinidad and Tobago, and in many, many, many salsa lyrics, as well as in Belize, Guatemala, in El Chocó de Colombia, in the black communities of Peru, in the Garífunas of Honduras. Africa is part of our essence, is our ancestry. Dominicans have a popular saying, we are black behind the ears. And in Mexico, they say, there is a black grandma in the closet. Muchas gracias. So we are going to open this for conversation, dialogue, and so we want to hear from you.
Very, very interesting. That's all I can say, because we know everything, even though they think we're not.
Appreciate that. Keith, you're a great intellectual, you know.
No, it was outstanding. It's interesting for me because I was invited to the Dominican Republic in 2007 by the State Department to deliver a series of lectures on the African slave trade and its impact to Caribbean countries. And as I was in Santo Domingo, I provided a lecture, and one of the things I had said was, most Dominicans have African ancestry. And it was an uproar. I was almost thrown out of the meeting. And there was a very brown-skinned woman who came to me and spoke very, very good English, and she shook her finger in my face and said, "You're a typical American. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm Dominican. I'm not African." And I said, "I understand that Dominican is your nationality, but do you recognize what your racial phenotype is?" And she says, "Dominican." and walked out. I mean, just pushed by me and walked out. And there was a lot of anger there. But what I recognized is that Dominicans, like African Americans, have faced hundreds of years of European colonization and oppression. And the psyche that gets into our heads is that the only way to advance is to be less black. In your actions, in your physical look, in your hair, in your dance, in your music. If you want to get ahead, you have to be less black. And the challenge today, quite candidly, is most cultures in the Western Hemisphere still reject or downplay their African heritage because they don't see it as a part of any level of social advancement. And that's why I think what you said is just outstanding, but it needs to be heard by a wider audience, and a particularly younger audience, because I still think there's a disconnect between African heritage and the formation of nearly all of us here in the Western Hemisphere. So thank you for your comments.
Yeah, thank you for your input. Yes, Jose, please.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations on your insightful presentation, which is full of historical perspectives and also, I would say, life experience, as you say, because you lived this, and I think that you bring to the foreground issues that are yet to be resolved. But it's not only in the Dominican Republic, and it's something that often in our discussion with African American brothers and sisters, and also African descendants throughout the continent, we fail to sometimes to take into consideration that what we believe about ourselves and what we experience as black people or people descendant of Africans is that we learn through two processes. One, the process of colonization, and the other of slavery. And slavery, in order to justify it and in order to enslave Africans, they had to destroy their culture, their identity, and also instill upon the African people that were being enslaved a sense of lesser humanity, so that in order for the slave masters to be able to justify enslaving Africans, they have to dehumanize. And that means degrading and taking away everything that made up that person as a human being. Now, what's really interesting is that both not only in the Dominican Republic, you go to the Dominican Republic and probably find a very dark-skinned person that is obviously descended from Africans who would deny that. They will deny their own blackness. I'm not black. They'll call themselves anything but being black. But the same thing exists in Haiti, where there is a caste of elites and blacks that are lighter color who deny their own identity and African descent, because it's the same product. And we're talking about the brainwashing and also the acculturation of people that are descended from those two processes, both the colonial and the slave experience. Now, something interesting is taking place not only in the Dominican Republic, but throughout Latin America and the world. And I see that with my own daughter and the young people. As you know, I work in this probably the school system in it, and it's that the young black women of Dominican descent and African descent throughout Latin America are not straightening their hair. They're beginning to say, there's a movement to say, I love my pajon, I love my hair. And they're refusing to straighten their hair and to use chemical. And I think it's a new rebirth of their identity. And we pay a price for bringing this to the forefront because, as you said, in the Dominican Republic, as you experienced, it was taboo to say that Dominicans are mostly African descent. And most people would say, no, we are anything but African or anything but black, but it's the opposite. We are primarily of black descent. The same thing happened, and you mentioned something. There's another myth about the fact that we also, and there was a recent study that was made that our indigenous people didn't disappear and they were not exterminated. The DNA, because they mixed with blacks, they interacted with blacks and the Spaniards. And there are segments of our population, and I believe that there's a very high percentage of our people who still have the DNA of the indigenous people.
7-8%.
So the indigenous people survived, although they were physically almost exterminated.
Yeah.
So this is a great rebirth. We went through the process of the civil rights and the rebirth and regaining the pride of African Americans, but we forgot, as you mentioned, that the majority of Africans that were brought to the New World, the so-called New World, didn't come to the northern colonies in the United States. They were brought and remained south of the United States and the mainland. So there's a need for us to really embrace and reach out across the distance in the continent to find the common link and to re-educate ourselves and not to see ourselves as separated by political boundaries and geographical boundaries and see ourselves different because of national. And I think that you made a very good point that there's a difference between your nationality as opposed to your ethnicity. As it is, there's a difference between nationality and citizenship. So most people mix that and have a misunderstanding because that's a culture, because we have all been brought up in a culture of separating and trying to deny who and what we are, and we find political reasons, we find identity reasons to perpetuate the concept and the values that were imposed on us by both the slave system and the colonial system. So I really would like to extend my congratulations because your presentation embodies and also is very rich in terms of viewing who and what we are, not just in the context of national origin, but in terms of ethnic and also in terms of the process that we all lived in to get where we are now. Thank you so much.
No problem. I think that you are enriching the conversation. Education is everything. We need to educate this younger generation about our history. Because, for example, when we talk about black pride, black is beautiful, and we hear Muhammad Ali saying black is beautiful, and we go back to Marcus Garvey. But Marcus Garvey was also an ally in the Dominican Republic. Marcus Garvey was instrumental in forming theatrical groups to educate, in the eastern part of the country, where you have the populations from Jamaicans, people from Barbados, who went to work in the sugarcane plantations, and we call it, it was a pejorative name called cocolos, right? From this English colonized island. So Marcus Garvey traveled to the Dominican Republic, and he was very instrumental in forming theatrical groups there. So also, before we talk about Marcus Garvey, then also we had to connect with Antenor Fermin, which is, in the Haitian community, was the big intellectual. The same thing with many others. But in history, you're going to see a lot of connection, but you need to understand it. And if we don't bring this kind of conversation to our communities, we're still going to be weak. So in order for us, and you're talking about this movement, which is very interesting, and I know Angelina Espinal, Angie, is one of the persons who came from Monte Plata to this country. When she came here, she thought she was white. And she talks about her hair. And when she discovered that she was not white, then she let her hair go natural. And so this is a movement that is reclaiming what was called Pan-Africanism. So now, this new generation of, young people who identify as Afro Latinos, they are building that movement, and I think that's important. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
In thinking about the history, I'm really intrigued by what you were saying about how the children were taught, and how in the history books that slavery was eliminated, because I work with kids and I also did my thesis on Black representation in United States history textbooks.
Great.
So I'm really interested in that, and I'm also curious about the use of the word mulatto, because that term
Because in this country, you don't.
it's a dehumanizing term that comes from slavery. So they're eliminating slavery. They don't want to talk about blackness, but then the mix is they're still using that derogatory term that is so dehumanizing. So.
And in our case, because also there is they created a false idea on what the term mulatto was. And that is why the whole confusion. In the United States, you only identify people white, blacks, and then there were also this notion about people who are yellow race. And you remember about people in the yellow race, la raza amarilla? So these were like people from Asia. So Asian people were like the yellow race. So we know the color is a fabrication. So and basically the purpose of naming people black and white was kind of to put blacks in an inferior category. So we all know that. But I really appreciate that. So your comment is very valid, because in our books there is a book from Juan Antonio Alich, which we consider the father of decimals, which is like some kind of a poem expression. And he wrote in his book, talking about mid of probably around 1844, 1845 in his books, he wrote about that. So it's already in his books, those things about this myth. It's a lot of mythology that they created to kind of, portray the image of blacks as well. Another comment?
My name is Melvin. I'm a Dominican. I was born in the Dominican Republic. I just want to, how can I say it? Basically, I relate a lot to what you just said. I was born in the Dominican Republic. My parents migrated here in 1990 when I was 5 years old. I grew up in New York, and it was, I didn't identify myself with either whites or blacks. It was truly something that now, as I'm much older and I understand where I come from, now I can say, I'm an Afro Latino, like Elvis is saying in his presentation. And this is something that's been a development. You talk about the movement that's been going on of awareness that us, the younger generation, are going through. And I, for myself, personally see it from looking at more at the African American culture here in the United States and what they're going through, and I can identify a little bit more with that. So now I'm being more receptive of where I come from, my culture. And I can see things that relate to the yes. As far as the music that I listen to, the food that I eat, and it's very empowering. And I think that this will continue. And talks like this, I wish I saw more young people, here, because this is truly enriching for us and our culture.
Great, thank you, man. Yeah.
I just want to share with you that I'm from Africa, I'm from Ghana, and I came here in 1988, and I just recently, my wife and I thought that we should give ourselves a gift. So the gift that what we gave ourselves was for Ancestry.com. And all what I was, to do our DNA. So what I was thinking about was that, do I have other people from Africa that are here that I didn't know, so that I can just get that connection? It's because I was the only one here. Guess what? I didn't even get, not even a single person. But I found out that I had 111 African American cousins. So I'm like, my God, I'm gonna call all these guys. they don't have to think about where they're from because they have someone from back home of the same blood. Till today, only 3 people called me. I was destroyed because I thought I could be the bridge that they've been looking for all this time. But 2 things, coming from Africa, some people didn't want to even say anything. And then the other one was that my last name is Mohammed. So that alone seems to have destroyed their happiness because they don't want to affiliate themselves with that type of name. I don't know, I'm just making it up, but that's what I'm thinking. So I just felt like African American brothers and sisters, a lot of people who are in darkness, who have turned their face away from their background and their history. It's so painful that we don't act like the way the Jewish people are. No matter where you are, if you are Jewish, you have that blood. You are a Jewish person. So sometimes I just don't understand why my brothers and sisters from here does not even want to accept that we are all the same. Look at me coming from Africa in 1988 and I have 111 cousins. That shows how close we are. So hopefully we will stop killing one another and just see each other as a brother and sister. So I just want for you to know that there's a lot of things going on whereas people still turn their back away from their background, their history. So yeah, but you're a brave man. Not everyone can do what you're doing coming from DR. So I just want to commend you and say that.
Elvis, yes. If you have some, but I just wanted to say that one of the resources and venues that we can use to expand and to promote this type of thinking and awareness has to come from our educational system. It has to be transformed. We have to include change the way we teach, change the context, the core of our curriculum, and it has to reflect the reality and the presence of the African experience. And until we start from our children early on and change the textbook and the way we teach history, it's going to be very difficult to reach our young generation because either they get it. It's never too late to get it, but if it's institutionalized, and if we, just like racism was institutionalized, so we need to redefine our education and our history through our curriculum. And it has to be there so that we can teach that and say, okay, now let's really look at what really happened and who you really are. And the same way that we study ancient history, which is Eurocentric, and we look at the contributions of Europeans, but we neglect and we fail to see the contributions of Africans and Arabs and Muslim and other cultures, and which make great contributions to science, to history, to technology, to medicine. And I think that that has to be embraced and incorporated into our curriculum. So I believe that we have, that's the best, that's the most effective way, because that's that's the manner in which we learn to have a wrong vision of who and what we are was through the educational system. So that's how all this was built. And I think that to dismantle this philosophies, this fake and artificial identity, it has to be done through with the same tools and the same structure and the same system that it was put together, and that's the educational system.
I'm just going to piggyback what this gentleman just said, because many years ago when I was executive director of Rhode Island Black Heritage Society, I remember giving a presentation to young people, and they were probably around 12, 13 years old, all African Americans, And I remember one part of the exhibit, it showed some slave artifacts. And there was a group of the children together, and they started laughing. And I said, oh, what was so funny? And the young lady, one of them said to me, they deserved to be slaves because they were uncivilized. That's the only way they could be civilized, coming here. And I said, from that day on, I said, we have to go back beyond what we were teaching here and begin our history back into the roots of Africa and then build from there. Because these kids had the impression that we deserved to be slaves in order to be educated and to be civil. That's what they were taught.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting, because I think also it is easy to see the connection with Africa. Today, I just got an email because UNESCO, there's information that was sent to me because UNESCO just proclaimed the merengue music as patrimony of the humanities. But also when we look at merengue, bachata, salsa, and you see this rhythm, we're talking about rhythms that are united by one instrument, the drums. Okay? So the drums plays an important part in all of these music. We connect all of us. Now, when we look at a few years ago, the UNESCO also recognized two major expressions that they are African rooted in the Dominican Republic. It was Los Congos de Villamella in the southern part of the country, because the Congos of Villamella, this is an organization that has kept almost intact, their African traditions. Okay? So they play congos, they play salve, and so they were recognized by UNESCO because of that. They still keeping instruments that are over 300 years, and they're intact. And even though from the capital city to Villamella is probably 30 minutes? Probably 30 minutes? I mean, this community should have changed, based on the fact that they are too close to the capital city, and they still have kept everything pretty much intact. Now, when we look at the immigration of blacks from St. Kitts and St. Neves that came to Dominican Republic as technicians to work in the sugarcane plantation, they also brought what? The culture, the music, everything. Because culture, that's part of who you are, okay? So they brought their musical expression and their arts, and they started creating theatrical companies. And so they created these dance we call guloyas, right? So they were also recognized by UNESCO also as a patrimony of intangible culture of the humanities. So then when we look at this expression, they are all African roots. No other expression were recognized, but those who are African roots, because they keep the essence of who we really are. So it's good, to have this kind of news, because we know that things are changing for good.
I just want to thank you for inviting us to this special event. It was very interesting, I should say. But you did not mention Cape Verde in your speech. Just that word. And especially, should I just let you say a few words on Cape Verde?
And I have to tell you, since you are my brothers in the Cape Verdean community, just because the title was about the Afro Latino experience, I didn't include the Cape Verdean. But I have to tell you that Dominicans and Cape Verdeans are the country that have more similarities. When we pass by each other, when I am in the Cape Verdean community, let's say I am in Potoki, they talk to me like I'm Cape Verdean, because Dominicans and Cape Verdean, they have phenotypical characteristics that are very similar. Unless you speak in Creole and I speak in Spanish, they will not know, or you will not know that I'm Cape Verdean, or Dominican, you're Cape Verdean, because we pass culturally. So we had the same, Cape Verdean and Dominicans also in terms of the identity, pretty much the same. We are dealing with the same issue of
artificial identity?
Yes, exactly so. You were colonized by Portugal, we were colonized by Spanish. So when you look at the issue, or even when we look at the food you eat, the cultural manifestation you have in the Caribbean community, I have attended to a lot of them because I'm a friend of the community and I validate. In fact, my wife is here. The music that we listen in my house is Cesaria Evora. There's nobody else. I mean, we love Cesaria. So we identify a lot with your cultural manifestation. So I just want you to know that.
And I believe we do have the same problem
Yes.
as far as identifying with African. We, Cape Verdeans, are from the African continent.
Yes.
But as you know, a lot of the Cape Verdean
Yes.
does not identify with the African, or don't want to identify with Africa for the same reason as Dominicans. But
And also, I have to tell you, Luis, that also you are fighting for the same problem that we have.
Yes.
And we know because of the census 2000, also Dominicans want to have a racial category in the census. The same thing with you. So many Cavadians were not counted in the census also because you identify as yes, exactly, or Portuguese or blacks. Another issue, another problem. See, when we look at, and this is the whole thing about how we look. So when we look at the President Barack Obama, or myself, so he's the first black president. But Barack Obama has as much as white and black, right? It's true, right? He has his 50-50, okay? So, but because of the way he looks, he is portrayed as just black, right? So, you know, these kind of topics are interesting because this is the only way that we can learn to appreciate one another.
another thing that you mentioned that I found very interesting, I don't watch that much TV, but when you mentioned the Spanish soap operas, you know, a lot of Cape Verdean watch that show. And I watched it one day, I was watching it, and I was thinking about the same thing you were thinking. When you see, you only see whites and black, when they portray black, it's like a servant. They don't have any acting part as regular people. I say, I don't know why are we watching that?
Yes.
It's not teaching us, black people, anything is not helping us, it's not promoting us. Why do we watch it? And I'm glad you said something about it yourself.
Yeah.
Olga, I want to put you on the spot because Olga is a Mayan person, and she's very knowledgeable of our community. I learned a lot from Olga when I was working at DHS with her. She's very knowledgeable, she's Mayan, and she can tell us a little bit also about your experience dealing with this. You know, we have why the indigenous people are not well portrayed in the media as well, right?
We go to the same thing that you were saying, Elvys, is that black, in Mayas, they are called Indians, but they are not from India, they are Mayas.
Exactly.
And this is a civilization that existed long before the Spanish came to Central America and Mexico.
Yes.
And there was a civilization called, Maya civilization, and they knew, they measured the distance between the Earth and the Moon, and they listened only by 3 meters. They built this beautiful temple that to this day many people don't know why. 62% of the populations are Mayas, and they speak 23 languages, and they speak 102 other languages that has no written alphabet. And from 4 of those 21 languages are the ones that are spoken in the first and the rest of the Americas, that we call now the Americas. So it's very interesting. But I was talking to Teresa, and in Guatemala we have a black community, and it's very isolated. It's isolated in Izabal. From Amates all the way to Puerto Barrios, you see black people, and in Livingstone. But in the rest of Guatemala, you see very little black people. And most of them, when I live in Puerto Barrios, they spoke English. And they still speak English. I don't know if they came from Jamaica or they came from the island that they were enslaved. And they came to Belize, and from Belize they went to Livingstone, and from Livingstone to Puerto Barrios. So very, very interesting. But I think that, I congratulate you for the presentation, but I think that it has to be something that has to continue. Because, in maybe going to the other communities, now that we have President-elect Trump, that we don't know what is going to happen. I heard that the Jewish community and the Muslim community are getting together to work on issues related to race. So I think it would be important, because before, we used to have Latino-Jewish connection. We worked together with the Jewish community, so it would be very interesting to be part of that and began to talk to the young people, the young generation, that they are the future of this country and they need to know their history. Like Jose was saying, the educational system is not doing anything to do that. So I think the responsibility is on us to do that. So we have to open it for more discussion than this one.
Thank you.
I just want to mention, I actually am a member of the Providence School Board, and I've been a part of certain communications that have been actually initiated by the youth in our community. So there's something called the Providence Student Union that over the past year has worked fairly diligently to bring ethnic studies to our Providence public schools. So this past September, in 5 select high schools, I can't remember which ones they are right now, but in 5 high schools in Providence, they did start a pilot program with ethnic studies as electives, and the superintendent has been very supportive, and I think the district in general is very supportive of this movement, and they're looking into incorporating more ethnic studies, not just as an elective, but in our overall curriculum. But it's something that, definitely does have to start with discussions like this, but there won't be any movement until the students ask for it, their parents support them, and then we have community members like the ones in this room also pushing for that change.
Great, congratulations.
Thank you, Danielis. Yeah, good.
Thank you so very much for a very stimulating presentation.
Appreciate it.
Having traveled around the world quite a bit, it has always come to me that there is this mixture of ethnicity just about anywhere you go. Recent visit to Peru, I had the opportunity to look at how they tell their history, the blending of the Spanish with the native peoples.
Yes.
The African influence, slaves that were brought to Peru, that influence. And it is a consistent theme around the world that people of color arrive, some through slavery, some through birth and heritage.
Yes.
And all of us need to start working together to find our place. One of the things that resonates with me is the population today. Individuals under 18 years old of color make up the majority in the United States. I think it's 2 years. In about 2 years, they will actually represent a very strong voting bloc.
Yes.
And so those are the kinds of things we need to educate the population on, so that they are aware of who they are, what the environment is in terms of their economic opportunities and their educational opportunities, and they need to vote that way.
Yes.
And so your talk is being recorded. We're going to try and put parts of it on our website.
Thanks.
And I have a couple of things that I want to say about that. First of all, I want to present to you an honorary membership in the Black Heritage Society.
Wow.
So,
thank you very much. Oh, wow, great. Thank you very much.
and the second item on December 10th, we are hosting and putting together our strategic review to really understand what our objectives and goals are, to really establish the guiding principles for moving forward. And it's been my push that we start to think about all of the people that have African descent coming together to form a future for ourselves. And we really want to have you participate with us.
Thank you.
On the
Appreciate it.
10th. Sonny will provide more details around that. Linda, you are invited too. You have a long history with the organization. And so Sonny can provide that approach. Everyone, if we would really applaud and thank Elvis for his
Oh,
talk.
thank you very much. It's an honor. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Very honor. Thank you. Thank you, and thank you all for coming. Thank you.